5 years ago, maybe?
5 years ago, yeah, 2019.
Yeah.
So it's recent, but it's huge. Now everybody is.
2021, yeah.
She's all the rage.
2021.
Yeah, Suzanne Brøgger. It's been very well received. I mean, this was translated and published by Bompard, and that was 2022, I think. But I mean, there is something. I mean, we like to look at the the floss, our Western affluent societies, call it whatever you want. I mean, this idea of putting that bomb and make it last. Perhaps because we also try to defy our structures, this framework where we are set, and we try to break, from Spanish rule. It doesn't work that well, right? But we try, and I think there is something also connected to this. We like to try to, tense the structures and try if we can break free. And then you were asking about Bompard, how we do it, and well, our view actually is really we have this vision that Nordic literature is at the heart of the very European literary modernity. And I mean, you said that at the beginning, Mireia, that we're very used to looking at literature via France, via Italy, via Spain. We have a mediated view of world literature. And I think there is another, kind of vision which can be very well explained through the Nordics. There wouldn't be Beckett, there wouldn't be Bernhard, there wouldn't be Jon Fosse without Ibsen and Strindberg. They are the fathers of this. There wouldn't be Joyce, there wouldn't be Woolf, even Faulkner, without Jens Peter Jacobsen. I mean, he's very well known, of course, in Denmark. He's okay known all over Europe, not that much, I think. If we think of how important he is, he's not well known here, and that's why we decided to translate one of his, he has two really important works, Maria Grube and Niels Line. I mean, Joyce said he always had Maria Grube with him whenever he traveled. He was fascinated by it because Jens Peter Jacobsen, he's the first one who tries what would be called stream of consciousness, what would be called inner monologue. He had this fragmentarian style which was not understood at the time, but Joyce did, and he built all his masterpieces upon the idea he had, what he had learned from Jens Peter Jacobsen. So we had this idea, and we have this vision, and we try to build this new, to chart this new arc. And I think independent publishers, they really have the possibility to do it now because the technology is here, the translators are here. I mean, you were, Inés, it was really great, all this explanation about reception, because you can see how much mediated the translations into Catalan of the classics were. So it's quite modern, actually. It's I don't know, 25 years ago, yeah, it's very recent. Now we have the translators, we have technology. In 2007 we got iPhone, we got Kindle, print on demand. All this didn't exist 30 years ago. So if you want it, take it. And that's our philosophy. And of course, we're not alone. There's Nits Blancas, there's Adesiara, you mentioned it also. They just published the whole L'Altra. There's Quid Pro Quo in Mallorca. So we really believe in that.
Thank you. Before coming back to Bernat, Liz, we were talking about conflict, about trauma. Do you recognize yourself as a critical, maybe not critical, sorry, do you reflect on criticism towards the society you grew up in? Because we know that Nordic societies, at least from our perspective, we idealize them somehow. Which is your position on this and your approach on this, maybe?
So first of all, I'll say that it's been really interesting listening to all this, because I really did not know about this and the intermediate translation as well. So I think that is excellent that you've got to do all this work. I think that one of the reasons that my grandmother became so popular was because that she, just by describing life, not because she made a political book or such, but just by describing a working class life, which is what she came from, she showed the cracks. The reason she was so popular was because she was not frightened of being honest about herself, anything from her men, her divorces, her drug abuse, and all that kind of thing. She showed everyone when she stumbled, and she showed the cracks, and she showed what it was like living life in this society, and I think that's very important. She was also very much concerned with the conditions, living conditions, and again she showed that by choosing topics for her books. That social interest or societal interest comes from before her, generations before her, but that has gone all the way down to me and to my daughters. And this is about not just about showing the cracks in society, but also discussing other ways. And also maybe you talk about the unconditional love, maybe talking about unconditional love in a different framework. So we don't have necessarily to understand and love everything that people we look up to, or people who are our nearest and dearest, they do, and we don't necessarily make the same choices as them, but that doesn't stop us from loving them. So that it doesn't, so it's kind of not looking at perfection, but looking at life conditions, which I think actually very much also is in the Nordic literature in a quiet way. So you don't have to make big political notes. Lots of people do, but you don't have to. But I would like to see my book as a comment on the society that we live in and the living conditions of women, but also of the family, and of the definition of motherhood and mother losses, and also the violence, the different shapes violence take, but not only that, the consequences of both the what you can call the governmental violence, which is the society, but also the violence, the different types of violence that you endure. If you're a victim of violence, you also you make different life choices, and you also seek love and approval and all that kind of thing, and that makes you perhaps enter into different kinds of relationships as well. So it's a general comment.
Thank you. Com veuen, la traducció simultània s'està fent esperar i no sé si arribarà. Torno a demanar disculpes en aquest sentit. Espero que vagin captant alguna cosa. Before starting this conversation, Bernat, you were saying that you were impressed or surprised maybe because Lise's mother and grandmother, they were strong women somehow. Do you think this notion of truth, this notion of rawness, of cruelty, which they expose their life, helps when we're reading their masterpieces?
Well, I don't know if it helps, but it's astonishing. And I want to follow some things Diana said, and she hit the nail on the head. While comparing our weight, she said Mediterranean way to read. I will say mostly Catalan way of reading this text, and this has something to do with your question. While I was reading these two books in parallel, I was also reading a novel, quite famous novel, written nowadays and published this year by a Catalan author, a female author. I will not tell the name. I don't want to get in problems. And it's a book, also about family, about pain, about fear. And she's about in her 40-somethings like me, so it's the same generation as mine. And she talks about the fear she has, when she goes to the beach, and she sees the kids when they're in the beach having a bath, and she's like playing with her friends, and she's like scared to death if they're going to die in the sea, or they're gonna put their fingers in a plug, and it's like, oh, this is my huge fear. And I was like, what the fuck is that? Sorry.
No,
I mean, what the like, while I was reading, like, when your mother was being molested by your stepfather, And I was like, let me be not provocative, but let me be clear on that. I mean, we would love to be Danish. We would love to be able to put all this trauma and all these hard existential threats your mother and your grandmother lived through. But when we do it, and it's not we are idiots, of course, we can write novels as well. We love so much to explain how beautiful, how poetic is our pain. It's something disgusting we have as a people. I mean, our die Wunde, as I'm saying it in German. We love to get the pleasure, this kind of Freudian pleasure in how we suffer, how we are afraid of everything. Well, there's some stoicism in your book regarding all your women that I think it's very refreshing for us. And we would like to be this way, but we're not. I mean, there's sometimes in the book you're explaining terrible things that happened to your mother, especially. Your mother was a great, strong woman. And there's a kind of feeling that someone saying, from beneath the prose, saying like, this is life. I mean, it's hard, but this woman suffered this, they went through it, they wrote about it, and they never complain. So, I mean, and while I'm reading especially Catalan literature nowadays, there's a lot of people complaining about everything. And you have a lot of things to complain. I mean, you were talking before about social justice, about female inequality, about poverty, whatever you like. And I think that's why it's very interesting to read this text. And this is why I was bringing up the subject of feminism, which we could change it, but we could change it not about talking about feminism, but individuality or freedom of the individual, because there's a sense in this book that life, it's made of challenges and of painful situations, and man, you got to get through it, and you have to survive, and when you survive, you win.
Yeah. But I'd like to comment.
There you
because
be my guest.
Because when it comes to my mother's suffering, she went through a lot in her childhood, and she kept it all to herself, bar a little revelation. She kept it because she was ashamed, and that shame made a big darkness around her. It also made her unable to be a traditional mother towards me. She actually chose for my father to be my main carer because she didn't want to influence me in such a way that I should suffer from depression, etc. But there was this darkness between us. I knew something terrible had happened to her in many ways, not just abuse. But I didn't know what it was, and I was also told not to talk to her about it because that would break her. So one of the reasons that I started looking into all of this was to show some light into this darkness, to find out what does this darkness consist of, and I'm happy to say that I've also succeeded in eliminating the darkness. Even though my mother is dead now, I feel we're like this close. There's nothing separating us because now I understand. So that's a really good thing. But she has been, this whole thing about, that's life. It is more so that I'm really advocating not hiding things away. And then that the things that happens in life get their right place in time, so they will not dominate you, because when you hide things away, when you feel shameful, you feel that you don't have a right to be in society on equal terms with everyone else around you, and it stops you from living the life that you should be living. It doesn't make things go away, it actually makes them bigger, because nobody knows really what it is, but it feeds into depression and whatever, substance abuse, etc. If you say, yeah, sure, that happened, that was shit, but now we know, and we all talk about it openly, we know that happened, for example, to your mother, and then we go on living, and then when it pops up, if my mother was alive, she could say, I'm having some bad days because this is popping up right now, I know all about it. I'll say, I understand that. So that's what I'm advocating. I'm advocating saying that, yeah, life deals us a lot of blows, and if we acknowledge these blows, then they don't become shame that you have to live with.
And there's also this sense, this very beautiful sense of secrecy regarding literature. I mean, if you see the beginnings of your grandmother, I mean, when she writes this first poems, she cannot, show them to. She's eager to show them to your dad, to your granddad, sorry. Yeah. She's like very excited when they go into the magazines. She runs to to buy the magazines and to show to their friends, but sometimes she doesn't have anyone to show them.
Yeah, that's true.
And this is very frustrating. And it's amazing also how she begins to write poetry with no academic education, which is quite genius. Because the first poems are great. I mean, I don't know if they are translated into English but I want to read them.
I think they are, some are translated into English, but not that many. There's a collection translated into Italian, but we don't want to do this bypass translation now.
No.
We're not doing that. But
we don't want Italians here.
None of that. But what is really interesting with her is that if we talk class and gender, is that she actually found out when she was 6 years old that she came from a socialist working class family. God is the opium of the people kind of upbringing. And then she goes to school and they play some they have morning assembly and they're singing some psalms. Is it called that?
Yes.
Yeah. And there's because I'm not brought up with that. And she got she got moved to tears, and she got teased by her friends and everything and her family, so she kept it to herself. But from that point on, she knew she had a poet inside of her. And whenever she had no connections, no network or anything like that, because they were really, really poor and working class. And her dad kept saying, forget about it. Forget about it because you're a woman, and forget about it because you need to know your place. You're working class, never gonna happen. She wasn't allowed to go to high school either, because you're gonna get married. It's gonna be waste of money for us. Not that they had to pay for that, but they had to go without her earnings, going to work in as a housemaid or in a hotel or whatever. So she just knew she couldn't wait until she got old enough to break out of that, and every opportunity she had to talk to someone.
Even though his father was a theoretical progressive.
He was, but he was, she said herself, he was burdened by his poverty. He read a lot of books, but he didn't acknowledge his own authority. So she couldn't talk to him about it, and so she sought out people who she could have these conversations about the wonders of words, and in one way it's a coincidence that when she ended up getting her first poem published, which is a really interesting one, because about a stillborn child. She had never experienced that, but she'd imagined it. And it was a coincidence. She met someone at a dancing restaurant, and he knew somebody who she could send a poem to, and this person acknowledged her poem. But she broke all of that, which is a strength in itself. Yeah. And no education. No, she wasn't allowed.
Sometimes we tend to glorify this stoic notion, right? But we tend also to forget that Nordic societies are one of the places in the world where people commit more suicide and are more isolated. Maybe Diana and Inés, you want to comment on the poems of her mother and grandmother, or maybe just feminist critique on that way, on the institution of marriage.
Yeah, perhaps I just, when you were explaining and talking about the secrecy, I remember that there is a passage in the trilogy of Copenhagen where she explains that she just got married. Oh, she just got married with her first husband, and she's perhaps 20.
The editor? You mean the editor?
The editor, right?
What a great character.
And he's 30 years her senior. Yeah.
So he's not a bad man, right? But the secrecy continues. She has to hide her poems, her writings away. She has to work whenever he's not at home, because when he says that she's working, he's like, you should be doing your chores, you should be, and he controls everything, you know, how much money she has spent when she went to the
And he
supermarket.
wants to influence the content.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible. I mean, so you see so many things which are from that time, but actually, I mean, as you said, we were talking about having a coffee before we started. There are some things we can't relate. I mean, there are some situations which are very old and the context was very difficult, but I think partly Tove Ditlevsen appeals to so many people because she really, really explains some things in a very neutral way, but in a way that we all can, you know, detect some things we all experienced. You know, so it's very interesting. I mean, from the feminist point of view. And then I wanted to talk about just very briefly, and then I'll just allow Inés to explain a little bit. But about this Kierkegaardian thing I saw in your book, because I think it's very important to understand your, or at least the way I see your stance, your literary stance. And it is when you talk about your mom and you have this, there's this striking moment where you ask yourself, you ask yourself, did she ever try to kill me? I mean, it is really a striking moment. But then instead of trying to seek an explanation or to justify her or you or slip into victimhood, which would have been very Catalan or very Western world nowadays, because the world has turned very Catalan in this way. So it's
Unfortunately,
trend.
yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Unfortunately, of course, because there's this trend of victimhood, right?
Yeah.
So you could have slipped into victimhood. You never do. You step back and you respect this privacy between your mother and God, or the greatest power, whatever, right?
And you try to understand it.
Yeah, but not, you know, giving many, just
not with moral superiority.
Just respect this privacy, and then it is then when you get really intimate with your mother, or that's how that was my feeling, and this, because you also say that you love, that you're sure your mother loved you, just as, I mean, this is very Kierkegaardian, this movement of, you know, Abraham also loved Isaac, but he was willing to sacrifice him, right? So I think there's, I mean, it's really something important in your book. And now, sorry.
It was interesting. I would like to take the thing of the female in the family with the genealogy, like also from a Nordic perspective, is like a very common tradition in Icelandic sagas, which is something that I know, and they have been in the medieval period very important. Many sagas begin describing or simply listing the names of all the ancestors of the protagonists, and they generate like an anticipation of what's going to happen when the central character appears. And there is a good example, also a bit hilarious example in Egil saga that I'm translating now, because Egil, which is the title of the book, appears in chapter 30. So it's just like 30 chapters of the genealogy of the family. So we are not used, I think, here to have such an enormous introduction of all the ancestors, and in that genealogies, they played a political role, because it was just a way to claim the land. We have inhabited this territory all these generations, but also served to, and this connects with your book, to explain inherited traits. No, for example, some of them quite peculiar. Egil and the grandfather are described as shapeshifters, so they change into a wolf or into a bear. And also Egil inherits from his father the art of composing skaldic poetry. So they are both poets. So this is interesting. But what is interesting and this breaks with the tradition of Icelandic sagas, is that it's not a man genealogy. It's a women genealogy. And I really like that, because this is new. So what is inherited is not in the male line, it's in the, so you are looking into the female line. So what's going on there? And talking about memory and inheritance, which I think it's central in your book, I would like to recall the last sentence in the book. Sorry for the ones you haven't read it, because I really liked it. It was the sentence is by your mother, so you finish with the words of your mother, and she speaks of you, and she says, ho llegeixo en català, que l'ha traduït la Diana, ho vull llegir per la Diana, and then I translate it into English.
Fine, I know what it says. So.
Exactly, you don't need translation. Diu, el seu esperit lluminós trencarà la mort de la seva nissaga materna que porta dins. Wow. So this wish, this is so striking. I found it like the best final. So this wish from your mother, I think, has become the driving force, behind the writing this book. So like you felt compelled to write the book, and that unfolds the stories of 6 generations of women. And these women that attempt to change the direction of these destructive forces, that you call them destructive patterns sometimes, that are very present in this book. And for the people that haven't read it, so that you get like a little bit to read it, I really like this turning point in the narratives of your family marked by shame. And then he makes a list, like a genealogy, the shame genealogy of the family. It says, okay, all the layers, and I will say, I have the list here. So, and I think I will read them because it's like this. There is a lot of themes in the book that are structured by this shame. So you are going to look into this kind of shame to get rid. You said, not to feel the new burden of shame. You said before, no? So, and it's the shame about being poor, the shame about having an alcoholic husband, shame about suffering violence, shame about being a single mother, shame about abortions, shame about alcohol, shame about failed marriages, shame about one's own sexuality, shame about not being loved, shame about not being able to love. It's so beautiful. There are more. It's just, you can go and to look at them. But this shame is related with, I don't know what you have imagined when I have read all that. There is a woman body behind all that, no? And there is this working class situation that is also depicting all that kind of things, no? And then you close the list. When you read the list, there is this striking sentence that says, in Catalan, again, Diana, many lies have been told, you know that, okay. S'han dit moltes mentides pietoses per encobrir la realitat dura i cruel. Tota aquesta vergonya que a casa nostra s'ha teixit de forma indestructible en el marc d'una lluita per existir. And I would just like to make a connection with a name that appears in your book, which is Freud, because I think there is this, I don't know if you know the text about family romances. He wrote this book in 1909, and there Freud analyzes the psychological phenomenon that is very common in childhood, which is that children create fantasies about their origins, which also has to do with genealogies and creation. And especially they do it when they feel neglected or unloved by their parents, or a brother appears or a sister appears and suddenly they are not the center of love. This is a bourgeois situation. It's not like the one you are describing, no? So there we see that this is another concept. But it's very common that children develop these fantasies that they are not the biological children of their parents. This is very common fantasy, but rather that they are the sons or daughters of more noble, powerful, distinguished people, kings, mothers. And here we have a lot of literature. Jesus Christ, for example. We have Moses. We have a lot of, Freud makes all these genealogies of children born in a humble family, Romulus and Remus, that suddenly there is another story behind, more that compensates the reality, so to say. And this helps emotionally the children to separate from their parents and to begin to construct their own sense of self, to become independent subjects. So this is very, according to Freud, we are at some point compelled to write this family romance, no? And paradoxically, no, in order to break away from our parents. So there is this hiatus, no, I don't know how to say that, no? So that the legacies that you say that we receive don't become our destiny. So we receive some legacies, but we are allowed to create something about that it is not our destiny, no? And I like when you go deeper into your research, how you begin to notice that there are a lot of, you say, parallel universes that emerge within the same lineage. So the women of the family are talking about different things, and you ask yourself, what is the correct version among all these different versions that exists about a person's or a family's life? And it's like, it's fascinating because you are contrasting all the different family novels of each of the women that are responding, no, these narrative attempts to break free, to avoid turning this family or these family repetitions into fate. And you show very clearly how you construct these stories built from memories. And I like it how you both document it. We could say in a realistic way with letters, with testimonies, but you also shape it with these memory fragments that I really like. This is structure of the book, where when you read the book, you will see that at the end of each chapter there is an anecdote that she remembers, and that makes like the end of that chapter, and that returns to us like a fragment of memory. And I would like to finish, I'm getting very long, with an example of how I try to argue. I'm doing this argumentation now, that you have a desire for documentation, for knowing the truth, a desire for realism, but there is also this conscious, I think, if I'm not wrong, that the remembering is also has a level of elaboration, no? That there is a level of desire involved, or longing, and there is the craft of writing into play. And I like to take one anecdote from your grandmother when you go, when you recall this trip where you go with your grandmother to Tivoli Gardens, the famous amusement park in Copenhagen, and then the grandmother, after this trip, writes an article into the newspaper, the Politiken, and then she reads the article and says, well, woman, this version doesn't match with what I have lived, no? And then she says, it is obvious that there are a lot of mistakes here. So, and then your father gives you the key to understanding what happens, and they said, well, writers like your grandmother draw inspiration from their real experiences, but each person remember events differently, even if they happen at the same time. And then he adds, the writer's imagination and sense of humor makes us, as readers, become immersed in the story they tell, no? And you conclude, understanding that, for me, was crucial.
Yes,
Like,
it was.
and I think this is another motivation for writing the book. Not only the words of your mother, but also these words of your father that shows you the kind of elaboration when one is writing about the own genealogy. You know?
And also, when you talk about truth, there is no truth. So I obviously need to find facts, but I'm driven by my life view, and I'm driven I'm looking for different things than you wouldn't be looking for. So I'm actually creating a memory around my life interests and the way that I recall, which is, even though that's a swear word now with Trump and everything, but then it's my truth, it's my story. It's nobody else's. And that is pretty crucial too, so yes, this is what I found, but I found it colored by my way of seeing the world and my viewpoint.
I feel that this thought maybe is the best closing statement we could have. We could continue for hours, of course, but first we would like to give you the chance and the opportunity to contribute to the debate if you'd like. Poden preguntar en català o en anglès, intentarem traduir-ho. We would try to translate anything you have to tell us. I don't know if someone wants to join.
Yeah, thank you. My question is mainly, I guess, to Lise, but it could be answered by anybody. How would you explain that, or how would you say that the book achieves the explanation of how to get rid of this shame without glorifying the sources of pain and shame? If it's an issue of aesthetics or an issue of how to approach it, or how it goes.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I think that the way you describe trauma is not in a glorifying way, basically, but it's looking at what's there. And by looking at what's there and acknowledging and being honest about what's there, then you actually get rid of the shame. But it doesn't mean that you love it, you know. I mean, it's just looking at what's there in order for it not to rule your life. But obviously, when you've been through trauma, that's not enough. You know, then you would need therapy and you would need all sorts of other things if it's your personal trauma. But the first thing is to not be shameful and not secretive about it. That's how I can best explain it.
Thank you. If everything has been said, maybe we can leave it here. Thank you again for coming. And now, if I'm not wrong, you can buy the book just leaving this room. Hope you have enjoyed this conversation. Thank you again, Bernat, Inés, Diana, and Lise, of course, for coming here at Ateneu Barcelonès. And yes, em disculpo un altre cop per la traducció simultània. És un recordatori per tots plegats que sempre que puguem cal aprendre idiomes i que la tecnologia no ho serà tot. Ja està, que tinguin una bona tarda.